Hi everyone, I'm Nick Olivo, and today we're going to build some macros in Roll20. Specifically, we'll see how to have Roll20 treat a roll of one value as a different value, we'll see how to create some attack and damage macros, and how to create command buttons in the chat to execute those macros. Now, in order to illustrate all these concepts, I'm going to be building macros for the Illrigger class. The Illrigger is a custom class available from MCDM Productions, and it ties into your existing D&D compendium within Roll20, so there's full support for it in the Character Mancer when you level up and all that good kind of stuff. But the Illrigger, I love this line right here. It isn't a paladin, it isn't a warlock, it's a unique class made for players who want to be a knight from hell. So this is a really fun class to play when you, as a player, want to do something a little bit different, or if, as a DM, you want to put in a new and exciting type of villain for your campaign that your players haven't encountered before. And Illriggers get some really cool powers, and that's what we're going to be making macros for today. Before we dive in, I'd just like to thank Roll20 for sponsoring this video. So the first Illrigger ability we're going to look at is this one right here, Forked Tongue. And the upshot behind this one is if you roll lower than an 8 on a persuasion, deception, or intimidation check, you can basically treat whatever you rolled as an 8. So the lowest possible value you can get when making one of those checks is an 8. So let's see how we can do that in Roll20. So here I am in Roll20, and let me just show you what we're going to be working towards with this macro we're about to build. So I'm just going to click on Forked Tongue on my character sheet here. It's going to pop up and ask me which skill do you want to roll with. I'm going to use Deception. We'll submit that. And then you can see right here, we've made our deception check, and that's going to be the lowest value I can get is a 13 based on my charisma score and my proficiency bonus because I rolled a 4. If we look at the dice here, I rolled a 4, so we're treating that as an 8, and 8 plus 5, which is my deception bonus, is 13. Okay, so you can see some of the math going on when I highlight over that roll what's actually happening here. So I've got my trusty notepad window here to help me illustrate stuff, and we're going to begin by putting a pair of double square brackets, and this is going to create our inline roll in Roll20. Now, in some of my previous videos, you've seen me do things like this, where we say we're going to roll 2d20, and we're going to KH1, meaning we're going to keep the highest one. So this is the kind of thing you do if you were rolling with advantage. But Roll20 also allows you to group rolls using these curly braces. So what I can do here is enclose inside curly braces. I'm going to say I'm going to roll 1d20, comma, and then I'm going to put in another die value, so let's just say 8d1. I'll explain this in a second. But basically what this means is we're going to roll a d20 and 8d1s, and we're going to keep whichever value is higher. So if we roll a 17 on the d20, we're going to keep that. If we roll a 4 on the d20, then 8d1s is going to be 8, and we're going to keep that. Now you may be wondering why we have to do this 8d1 thing, why we can't just do 8. And the answer is Roll20 requires some sort of a die in order to do the comparison for the keep highest. So there's two ways you can approach this. You can do 8d1, which is going to roll 8d1s and sum those, so you get 8. Or you can say 8 plus 0d0. And I'm actually going to go with that approach instead, and I'll show you why. If I take this value right now and I roll this, and I hover over it, you can see it's a d20 plus 8 plus 0d0, and when we get to that equals line, it's 14 versus 8, and we kept the highest one. If I do the 8d1 bit, you see we get this exploded view, and there's all those red ones that come out. It makes it a little harder to read. I kind of like this notation better because it's easier to kind of quickly compare, oh yeah, I rolled a 14, and so we're using that instead of the 8, versus I rolled a 17 and then we have all these ones stretched out across the roll. So just to keep the syntax cleaner and easier to read, I'm going to stick with the 0d0 syntax. And then what we want to do is add in the bonus for whatever type of charisma-based check that we're doing, whether it's deception, persuasion, or intimidation. And those can all be found on your character sheet if you go to the attributes and abilities section and then scroll down. You're going to see all of your bonuses. And so, for example, here's my deception bonus, here's my intimidation bonus, and there's going to be a persuasion bonus in there as well. So all I need to do is add that in. I'm just going to say plus my deception bonus. The thing is, if I run this command exactly as it is right now, you're going to see we're going to get an error message saying that we can't read properties of undefined substring. And that's because in this example where we're saying @deception bonus, Roll20 is actually expecting us to be running this from a character sheet. So we're going to be putting these macros directly into our Illrigger's character sheet, so we won't get that error message. So what I'm just going to do is copy this again, and we're going to put it into the abilities section here on attributes and abilities. I'm going to make a new one here, and I'm just going to call this my test ability, and we'll paste that in. And when I roll that, you see we got a 13, and if we hover over it, you can see that I rolled a 7, and so 7 is lower than 8, of course, so we used 8 for our die roll, and then plus 5, which is my deception bonus. So ultimately, we create 3 lines that look like this, one for deception, one for intimidation, and one for persuasion, and that covers all the skills that Forked Tongue works with. So now what we want to do is build that query that prompts the player to select which skill they're working with. And that's going to start out looking something like this, where we have a prompt. That's what this question mark squiggly bracket looks like. We're going to say which skill, and then deception, intimidation, persuasion, each item separated by a pipe, and that's going to tell Roll20 that those are the different choices available from within the dropdown. And just to illustrate that real quick, let me copy this and I'll throw it into the chat here. So we run that, and you can see which skill. We have our 3 choices: deception, intimidation, persuasion. I'll choose intimidation, submit, and okay, intimidation was selected. Fantastic. So now what we need to do is have Roll20 perform the appropriate roll for each skill. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to put in a comma after deception, and then we'll put in our die roll for deception. So I'm just going to copy and paste that down there. Okay, now let's copy this real quick again and run it from the character sheet. Because remember, again, when we're using the @deception bonus type syntax, we need to be doing it from within a character sheet. And so when I do this, you'll notice our skill thing is kind of mucked up. What's going on here? Just a second ago, this was totally fine. Why is it all of a sudden not working? Well, the way that the queries work is we start out here with this question mark open curly brace. Roll20 is going to treat the first closing curly brace that it encounters as the end of the query. And because the first ending curly brace is inside of the die roll, that's what's causing it to not work properly. So what we need to do is replace that curly brace with the corresponding HTML character code, which is this &#125 semicolon. We also need to do the same thing for the comma inside the roll, because you can see right here we're putting in a comma to say this is what we're going to do when we select deception, is everything after this comma. So again, having another comma here will break that. So we're going to replace the comma with its corresponding HTML character code, which is this &44 semicolon. So now that we have that, let's go ahead, let's copy this and run it from our character sheet again. We'll just update our test entry here, and we'll roll that. And you can see now it's working properly. We've got the 3 choices listed, and so when I select deception, we make our roll, we check to see if the D20 roll is higher than the 8, which in this example it's not, and so then we add our deception bonus to it. And just to keep things moving, I've gone ahead and updated these 2 lines so they have the appropriate character codes for their commas and closing curly braces. But you may be wondering, well, Nick, what about the closing curly brace for the deception bonus? Do we need to replace that one too? And the answer to that is no. And it has to do with how Roll20 parses these commands. The Roll20 order of operations is it's going to take care of attributes and abilities first, so that @deception bonus is going to get evaluated and turned into 5 before we go through and do the rest of the query. So that has already been handled within Roll20, and you don't need to replace it with a character code. So to finish this out, all we need to do is put in the appropriate command here. We're going to say intimidation, and we'll put in the intimidation roll, and we'll do persuasion, and we'll put in the persuasion roll, and that will take care of all of the actual rolling. So if we do this one more time and throw it into our test roll here and then roll it, we choose, let's say, intimidation, submit, and there's our 17. Now, just so that it's clear about which skill we selected when the player says I'm doing forked tongue with intimidation or with deception or whatever, we're also going to put in a little bit of descriptive text at the start of each die roll. And that's just a simple matter of finding each skill, going after the comma, and we'll just say deception check, and then it'll be the die roll. And I've gone through and done the same thing for intimidation and persuasion. So now that we've got all this done, what we'll do is copy this, go back to our character sheet, and let's go back to the main page of the sheet. Scroll down here and open up Forked Tongue. Just click on the little gear icon here, and we can actually paste in that whole query right into the Forked Tongue entry. And so now when we click on the bubble to send it to the chat, you can see, okay, which skill are we using? Let's go with intimidation. Submit, and there we go. We can see intimidation check was rolled, and we got a 14. And I like putting that query right inside of the Forked Tongue character sheet entry because now it serves as a reminder to my DM that I have this capability, and also helps explain why I'm changing the die roll if it was lower than an 8 to be an 8. So the other Illrigger ability we're going to create a macro for is this Infernal Conduit power. And the upshot behind this is it allows you to transfer hit points between the Illrigger and other targets. So basically you can sacrifice health to heal an ally, or you can drain energy from an enemy in order to heal yourself. So we're going to create macros for both sides of this. Now, because we're not using the API in this video, you will not have the health automatically removed or restored from your Illrigger. That is something that could be done with the API, but for purposes of this video, we're just going to be displaying the amount of damage or healing that's being performed. So here we are back in the game, and I've already set up the macros. You can see they're down the bottom left of the screen here. This one, willing, is for when I'm going to transfer hit points to one of my allies. Unwilling is when I'm going to try and siphon energy from one of my enemies to heal myself. So let's start out with what the willing would look like. So I'm going to click on that, and it says, okay, who do we want to target here? So we're going to click on our ally here, and we're going to say how many dice. So the Infernal Conduit ability gives you a pool of dice that you can roll, a bunch of D10s. And the amount that you roll on those D10s is the amount that you transfer. So we're just going to say we're rolling 1 die. We'll submit that. And you can see here in the right, it says Sortra, that's my Illrigger, has sacrificed 10 hit points and transferred that to Jace. Jace has recovered 10, and overall 10 necrotic damage to Sortra, 10 health restored to Jace. So let's see how we build that. So I'm just going to paste in the code here, and I'll talk through it piece by piece, what's actually happening here. So the first thing we're going to do is this chunk right here, this ampersand template : damage. That's what says the output of our roll is going to look like what's over here on the right. We don't need to make an attack roll with this because we are just transferring health from ourself to our ally. There's no attack roll, no saving throw needed. Then we have our name, Infernal Conduit. So that's what shows up in the bottom of the box here. And then range equals touch. That's what shows up right here. So these next two, damage equals 1 and damage 1 flag equals 1, this is saying that yes, we're going to display the damage, which is this value right here, the die roll that we're actually making. And then you remember I got prompted for how many D10s I was going to actually roll. And that's what this DMG1 flag is. This is saying what the actual roll will be. And so I have that as an inline roll. So we got our double curly braces here. And then a prompt, how many dice are we rolling? And I had it auto-populate with a 1. That's what the pipe 1 means here. So that means I'm always going to have at least 1 in there. I could, of course, change it to a different value if I wanted to. And then however many dice that we are going to roll, that many D10s. So if I put 1 here, we're going to roll 1 D10. If I put in a 2, it would be 2 D10. DMG1 type is necrotic, and you'll see underneath the die roll it says necrotic. The desk is the description that goes along with this, and the description is this little box that's above the die roll, and I have it saying at character name, so that's my Illrigger, so the name being read from the Illrigger's character sheet, sacrifices, and then we got this $ double brace 0. I'm going to come back to that. So we're sacrificing HP and target name. So this is when we selected our ally. You saw me click on my friend Jay's token. They recover HP. So what's going on with this double bracket 0 $ thing? This allows you to reuse the value from a previous roll in your macro. So the only die roll that we actually have happening here is this one. This is the original die roll that was performed, and Roll20 is 0 based, meaning that the first die roll that you perform in a macro is actually number 0. And then the second one would be number 1, and so on and so forth. So here what I'm saying is I'm going to $, which tells Roll20 we're reusing a previous roll, and then which roll? Well, roll number 0, the first one. So Sortra sacrifices however many hit points we rolled, and the character we selected recovers that same amount of hit points. So that way, we always have the same number being used throughout the course of the macro. Now you may be wondering, is it really necessary to put in that description to say that Sortra transferred the health to Jay's? And it's not essential to do that, but I like doing that because that way, if somebody needs to scroll back through the chat to say, hey, wait a minute, why does Jay's have that extra health? Then we have a record of the transfer taking place. So now let's look at the other side of this ability where we use it to drain health from an enemy and use it to heal ourselves. So that's this unwilling macro that I've got here. Just like before, how many dice are we rolling? We'll say 1, we'll submit that. You can see we've got 2 dice being rolled for advantage and disadvantage. We're doing 5 necrotic damage on a hit, and we've got this note saying that Sortra heals the same amount of HP as she drains the life from her foe. So let's see how this one works. Alright, so to start things off, we are using the attack and damage template. That's what's displaying both attack rolls and damage output in the chat. Then we have this section, mod. And mod is the little number that appears to the right of the name. That is the modifier that's being applied to the attack. And in this example, the mod is our character's proficiency bonus plus her charisma modifier. And so that is a 2 for the proficiency bonus right now and a 3 for the charisma mod, so that gives us our 5. The R name, just like before, is Infernal Conduit, and that shows up right here. And then this R1, this is the left-hand roll that you see right here, and that is 1d20 plus our proficiency bonus plus our charisma modifier. This always means that we're always going to roll 2d20s. So we get this output here where we have a left-hand roll and a right-hand roll. And then that second die roll is going to be the exact same thing as R1. So effectively, we're rolling 2d20s, and we're adding the same modifiers to that. Attack equals 1, that means that we're actually going to show these numbers that we're rolling. The range is touch, so just like what we saw before. And then just like before, damage 1 and damage flag equals 1, that's going to actually display the damage. And damage 1 is exactly the same as what we saw with the other macro. It's prompting us how many d10s do we want to roll, and the damage 1 type is necrotic. What's different here now is we have this crit section. So if we roll a nat 20, we want to double the amount of dice that we are rolling for our damage. And so that's what crit 1 means. We're basically reusing that selection from before. So if we said we were rolling 2d10 up here, then we're rolling 2d10 down here as well. And then lastly, we have our description, which is that little box right here saying that Sortra heals this same amount of HP as she drains the life from her foe. And I like to put that reminder in there just so that you don't forget to heal yourself when the DM applies the damage to the monster. Now you might be looking at this and saying, hey Nick, in the crit section, why did you write the query again? Why didn't you use that $ syntax that you showed earlier? And the answer is the $ syntax is going to use the exact value that came off of that roll. So if your initial damage roll was a 2, then your critical damage is going to be a 2 as well. And we don't want that. We want it to actually roll the dice again. So by repeating the query exactly as we had it before, Roll20 will take the number of dice that we selected initially and it will roll those again rather than using the value from that die roll. So now that we've got all the code written, we can actually just go into the attributes and abilities section, and I've created 2 abilities here, one Infernal Conduit Unwilling, one Infernal Conduit Willing, and I've just pasted the appropriate code into each of those macros, and then set them to show in the macro bar, which puts them down here. And that's fantastic, and that's how I would probably want to play. But some folks don't like to have buttons in the bottom of their screen. They feel that it clutters up the interface, and they don't want that. And that's totally cool. So for those folks, what we can do is create something like this, where we have these buttons pop up, and we click, okay, I want to do willing, and then I would choose my target. So there's my character there. Let's choose my dice, and there we go. Or maybe I want to do unwilling, and again, choose my dice, and there we go. So how do we create these command buttons? So the code for that looks like this. We're going to start out with a /w. This is a whisper. And the person that we're whispering to is the character that we're running this command from. So I'm running this from Sortra's character sheet. So we're whispering to Sortra. So basically we're talking to ourselves. And then this square bracket unwilling, that becomes the button that you see right here. And then parentheses and tilde, the name of the ability that we're referencing. So I'm calling the Infernal Conduit Unwilling ability from my character sheet. And then willing, which is right here, and again tilde, and we're calling Infernal Conduit Willing. So this tilde syntax is how we reference other abilities that are on our character sheet. And I want to do that because, again, all of these macros are only relevant to my Illrigger, and so I'm going to keep all of them on her character sheet. So now all I need to do, I take this code, I copy it, I put it into a new ability called Infernal Conduit, so there it is, and now I can just roll that, and you can see it pops up the willing and unwilling buttons, and then I can choose whichever one I need, and we go from there. So that's how we can create some macros for the Illrigger class in Roll20. I just want to say thank you to the folks at MCDM for making this class. As you can tell, I really like it. I'm going to be using an Illrigger as the big bad in an upcoming campaign, but I think that as a player, it would be really fun to do a Suicide Squad kind of campaign where you are Illriggers and Death Domain clerics and you have to go out and try to save the world. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And until next time, folks, have a great day.